Hello again, everyone. Michael Vosbine, your host for Drummer Nation Live, the show where we talk about all things drum and drumming with some of the best in the business. Today's no exception as we have the wonderful jazz drummer Clayton Cameron, best known for his excellent brushwork and his long stint with Tony Bennett, where they won a passel of Grammys. It's a repeat performance, and I'll explain why in just a second. Let's get going.
Hi, I'm Stan Kiawa, and welcome to the Professional Drum Shop. 1959 it opened up. Here we have Buddy Richards, the last set he ever played. Last gig he played with Mel Torme at the Palladium. I set it up for him. One of the most iconic pictures is this one. Joe Morello Clinic around 1963. Mr. Hal Blaine, good friends of the store for decades.
The stories that go on, I mean, if these walls could talk, holy mackerel, we'd all go to jail.
Hey everybody, how you doing? This is Bobby A, and today I wanted to tell you about how much I really love the Hudson Music digital app. Okay, now, check it out. It's an app that you can get for your device, and you can purchase books from the Hudson Music digital store and have them stored right on your device. The great thing about it is you always have it with you, and any content that might be video related or music related is right there at your fingertips. It's a wonderful resource.
All right, let's get rolling. Few words of explanation. The last few weeks I've been showing some repeat performances because I've been involved working with the campaign communications director, co-manager of a campaign for my neighbor who was running for the Georgia State House as a representative for our district. That's the state version of the House of Representatives in Washington. Every state has its own. And how'd we do? Well, we didn't win, but we didn't expect to win. What we expected to do was try to shift a few grains of sand our way. You have to remember we're in a county where I don't think there's a Democrat has won any position anywhere, maybe ever, certainly not in the 30 years I've been here. And this was the case again. But we gave it a good try and had a good time, and I learned a lot and made a lot of friends, and I don't regret it for a second. I was working with a wonderful candidate who I'm proud to call my friend. So I thought during that period, since I was busy, the last month it got real crazy, I would do some repeat broadcasts. The first one I did was David Garibaldi because I had interviewed him several years back in a hotel room in Atlanta, like in August, and the AC was blasting and it was just too much noise to really hear David well. And it's been proven that people will tolerate grainy, funky video, but not poor audio because it just beats you up. So I learned enough to make that sound a lot better and did it a few weeks ago. Last week I did a repeat of the Peter Erskine, my friend, and we talked about some project we had been involved in, and it was a repeat of an interview I did with him at a convention some years before. But I did it because he was going to PASIC, which was this past weekend, where he was inducted into the PAS Hall of Fame. And congratulations to Peter, well deserved. I posted it on my Facebook page, and I've got, I don't know, more likes than I've ever gotten, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. So we all wish Peter congratulations and his well-deserved induction there. I got a few other friends in mind. I hope that will soon follow. So that being the case, I had this interview. I cleaned up a little bit with Clayton Cameron, and I'm going to step out of the way and show you a part of it. Then we'll have a spot and another part and wrap it up that way. And hopefully by next week or two, I'll be back to new shows. But I appreciate you watching. Here's Clayton Cameron. Welcome again to another edition of Drummer Nation. This is the full-blown interview show, and I'm delighted to have with me as my guest Clayton Cameron. Hi, Clayton. How are you?
I'm good, Michael. How you doing?
Oh, it's great to see you. We've run into each other here and there for quite some time, but I've never had a chance to really sit down and chat with you at length. So I sure appreciate
My
that.
pleasure. My pleasure.
You were on the show last summer with that Downfall of Paris collaboration that Sean Kennedy put together.
Yeah, playing a few rudiments, you know.
So let's start with the first things first. How you been holding up through COVID?
I've been good, you know. I'm here. I'm healthy. You know, I got vaccinated, and most importantly, my family's all good. You know, I got two kids that are doing fine, and my mom, who's in her 80s, she's doing rock solid. So I can't complain. You know.
Great, great. Now, what have you been doing to keep yourself in shape musically during this dormant period for all of us?
Yeah, I basically maintain my sanity by just being creative. I'm always at the piano composing and learning, so I do that almost daily, and I enjoy it. So it's not like it's some sort of arduous task. And then I had a couple of projects that I worked on and complete. One is completed, one is in route to being completed. A CD project with a buddy of mine named Johnny Valentino, composer, guitarist, called Collective Thinking. And so it's one of those COVID projects where we all recorded, in our respective little studios and stuff. And Johnny wrote most of the tunes. I wrote a tune on there, and we got great cats to jump in like Jimmy Haslip and Alan Pasqua. So so that's out now. That came out. That was really it was something fun to do during COVID. And then I'm working on a book called Perfect Time, that I've been using the material for many years now, and so I'm finally, it's coming into a book form, and so hopefully I'll be finished with that by the fall. But I was working on that throughout COVID, so it kept me busy.
Now, this whole online meeting thing, like we're doing, like projects that involve people in different parts of the country or the world, is that something you had to jump on, or were you always playing around with that? Is it comfortable for you?
Well, I was always doing online lessons, kind of thing. I was doing that. I had been doing that sort of thing on Skype and Zoom
Hmm.
prior to COVID. So, so there were some students that kept studying with me, online, that sort of thing. And then as far as the doing the workstation recordings, I had because I had always been composing. I was using Logic, that sort of thing, and throwing stuff into there. So it wasn't like a big stretch for me to. I'm not like a big Pro Tools guy with a big studio or anything like that. But I had knowledge at least where I can get by.
Don't you think that's important for young players today?
Yeah, I think that's just where we're at, and I think if nothing else, I think the young guys are right in there on it. Most of them, anyway, that I know. I teach a lot. I teach a lot of students at UCLA, and I'm learning from them all the time. So
Mhm.
they're coming out of high school, so.
The online thing to me, I'm comfortable with. Don't you find it comfortable teaching online?
I haven't had any issues. Actually, I enjoy it. I don't have to go, pay for parking at UCLA. But I mean, we'll be going back in the fall. But yeah, no, there's a lot of things that you can, do without any issues. I think drums kind of transfer pretty well in terms of that. Even, when I did the Living Art of Brushes, um, uh, that video came out in 1990, and the camera angles and stuff like that. I was already, I was doing that stuff then. We had the overhead camera. In fact, I don't even think there were any videos that had overhead teaching at that time. And so, the whole perspective, having a couple of cameras where you can demonstrate and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so it's just kind of like a natural fit for me. I didn't have any issues with trying to get information over line.
Good. That's been my hobby, I guess you'd call it, keeping me sane,
Yeah.
along with practicing and so forth. So live gigs are starting to happen again now for you, right?
Yeah. I'm pretty happy. I mean, it's only June. We just opened up here in California this week, and so next week I got a recording session and another live gig, and I got to do with my band. We're going to do at the LA County Museum of Art. LACMA. They have a Friday night concert. Every week during the summer, spring and summer. So they haven't quite gone live yet. So we're gonna, with my group, we're going to go in and pre-record, and that'll go out on YouTube and then on KJazz. So so hopefully this is kind of like the end of that little period
Mhm.
where it'll start being live again at LACMA. So So I can't really complain too much.
Yeah, indeed. Good for you. Now, you're one of the few native Los Angelinians, or how do you say that? Well,
Yeah,
what do you call
yeah,
somebody from Los
that work.
Angeles?
Yeah,
What's the word? Is it
Angelino.
Los Angelina? Just
Yeah,
Angelino.
yeah, yeah.
All right. So,
Los Angeles.
what was the early fascination with drums for you? How'd you get on that path?
Yeah, it's kind of like the Harry Potter thing. The one chose me. It was just like, I don't know why I liked it so much, but I was totally OCD, as a young kid, banging on pots and pans and even making my own, bongo drums out of cylindrical oatmeal boxes. I mean, literally doing that sort of stuff. And then by the time I was 12, a neighbor who was a musician. I actually had a couple of musician neighbors, which was incredible at that time. But one of them was a conga player, and his son and I were the same age, and he invited me over his house. He always hear me in my backyard playing the bongos, and so he invited me over, and I went over and jammed with him. And I would find out many years later, after I was already a professional, I was just hanging out with him in Hawaii, and he said, I told your dad he should get you some drums. And I'm like, what? You told my dad to get me drums? So when I was 12, I came home one day and there was a drum set in my living room. And then my mom and dad sent me to a place called Grant's Music Center, which is in Mid City, LA, and that's where I'm from. It's an area that actually has a sign at Los Angeles, Venice. It says Mid City, and so there was a little strip mall called Midtown Shopping Center, and there was a mom and pop music store. And so, when I was 12, my parents sent me down there for $7 for a half an hour lesson, and I did it, up until from 12 years old until I was in college. I throughout high school and then in college, I went there. And the thing about that place is, where I was so fortunate, and it's kind of like an outlier thing, is that at 16 years of age, I had something that would change my life. Basically, is I would sit in on a rehearsal band that was at the Grants Music Center. It was all these professional guys, that would rehearse, these big band, and so so I would just sit there and watch the drummer, and go, oh man, how does he do that? How do you read those charts? Because I was still working on my rudiments and going through the Will Coxon book and four-way coordination and all of that kind of stuff. All the the right books, I guess. And so one day I was there and the drummer was not, and so the leader of the orchestra leader that day, his name is Gil Askey, who was a his claim to fame was that he was a musical director for Diana Ross and did all the music for Lady Sings the Blues. But he was such a great musician. He was a trumpet player, a composer, and arranger. And anyway, he was hired by Berry Gordy and ended up being, one of the big arrangers at Motown. Anyway, so he was running the band that day, and he saw me sitting there near the drums, and he goes, he was a stutterer, and he said, "Do you play drums?" And I wanted to say no because I had the feeling he was going to ask me to sit behind the drums with the band, which, you know, I was like scared frozen. And I said yes. And he said, well, get up there then. So there was no drummer. I don't know what a drummer was. And so I sat in, and it was a complete, as far as I can remember, it was a complete disaster because I remember Gil saying, get up those drums. And he came and he took my drumsticks, and he's a trumpet player. He had no technique or anything like that. But he started swinging, and he was looking over his glasses at me. I was like over to his right, and he's looking back at me. He goes, well, when you play drums, you gotta have attitude. And he was swinging. I was like, man, this guy can't even hold his sticks, and he sounds so much better than me. And so from that moment on, it was like an epiphany, for me, never mind just reading the music, but just the attitude, of bringing a groove, to the music. And I learned it right then that day. It was like, oh my God, that's what this is about. And so from then on, from the age of 16, all throughout high school, I was the drummer for that band. I became the drummer, and I learned, and it was like, and these guys, and it wasn't like one of those kind of things where you have these organized schools, where your mom and dad pay money for you to play with other kids. No, these were all professional musicians.
There you go.
And I was this kid playing with them. And so over the summer, that's how I spent my summer doing gigs with the big band. They had this thing in LA called trust fund gigs, and so
Mhm.
I
Through the
remember
union.
all these musicians signing these papers after the gig or before the gig, and I asked one of the musicians as well, if you want to get paid, you got to join the union. And
There you
so
go.
and so I talked to my mom about this the other day, and she said no. She said you joined on your own. Because I said I thought that she and my dad had put up the money. She said no, you got the money, you got paid, and then you joined the union on your own. And I said, oh, no kidding. So I joined the union, when I was a teenager because of that band. And
That's a great
so
story.
anyway, so I got all this experience playing with them, and it really was, I didn't realize how fortunate I was because it was a consistent thing, that I would
Right.
do throughout the years.
So you had supportive parents, you had good teachers, you had access to professional musicians.
It was a total outlier thing, especially with the big band. That was just
That's a
crazy.
great story. Well, from some of the young watchers who may not know what rehearsal bands are, it used to be that much of the music industry was based around big bands and the ability to read and play in a band. You didn't want to make any mistakes on the gig or on a session, so guys would put rehearsal bands together that were just fantastic with pros who did it to keep their skills up.
Yeah, no, exactly, and that's these musicians, studio guys, touring guys, so it was, so I was playing with people that I didn't even know were famous. Like for instance, there was bassist Larry Gales,
Mm,
who passed away many years ago. He used to play with Thelonious Monk. He
right.
was like one of the bass players.
Wow.
So I'm playing with Larry Gales, coming up in this band,
He's
you
one of the
know.
best arco players I've ever heard in my
Oh
life.
yeah, oh, he would do, yeah, he was beautiful. He's like Slam Stewart, that kind of
Mhm.
thing. Yeah,
I
he
got to
can.
hear him a few times when I lived in LA.
Yeah, and
Great
so
band.
Larry Gales, was one of them. Um, uh, Gerald Wiggins, and I mean, just all these different guys, and so that would later lead, and inadvertently, it prepared me for, like when I was in college. I think when I was a junior, I Gerald Wilson used to teach at Cal State Northridge,
Hmm.
and I was a student there. And so I took his history of jazz course. I just loved it. And so I would go in there throughout my 4 years of college and just sit there and listen to him because he was always playing records, and he was always talking about him. And this guy was there, he was, you know, um, old enough to have known the people he was talking about. And so I would sit there and listen. And so one day, as a junior, I said, hey, Mr. Wilson, I said, you mind if I bring a trio into your class to, play some music? And he said, yeah. So I got my high school buddy Billy Childs, myself, and I can't remember the bass player, sadly, but I think it was a guy named Billy Carroll. And so anyway, so we went in and we played for his class, and and Gerald enjoyed it so much so that the following week when I would see him again, he says to me, he says, "Hey Clayton, are you available to do a recording session next week?" And I was like, Gerald Wilson's asking me this, so I said, "Oh yeah," and so that next following week we were, I can't even remember the studio we were at, but it might have been Capitol. But we were over at the studio, and it was a 2 day session. So I was on the second day, and in the band were these legends of studio and and jazz, like Snooky Young,
Hmm.
like Jerome Richardson, Oscar Brashear, J.J. Wiggins. Um, who am I thinking of? On Ernie Watts.
Oh yeah,
Ernie Watts was on there.
legendary LA Cats, all of those
Yeah, John B. Williams was also playing bass. So I did my session was with John B. Williams.
guys. Hmm.
J.J. Williams was playing piano, and I found out later a young Anthony Wilson was at the studio. He told me, "Yeah, I remember when you did that session with my dad." And he was
Really?
like 10 years old or something,
So that's
and
Gerald's son, who has worked extensively with Diana Krall, among
yeah,
a
yeah,
lot of other
extensively with Donna Crawl, put out
great
his own
guitarists.
records. Yeah, so he's just a great young musician. So anyway, so that's how I grew up in LA, and so and I what's interesting, I didn't know anything about the Valley I knew nothing about Valley musicians and all these different guys because I lived mid city LA and everything that I did was in mid city or south, going into Watts and Compton and all of that kind of stuff. So everything that I did was based on it. So I didn't know any musicians out of the Valley,
So
which
many,
was interesting. That was a whole nother world. And
so many
so,
different scenes out in LA. You know, there are
yeah,
cats
yeah,
that just
exactly.
do record dates for pop music, and guys that just do movie scores, and jazz cats, and there are all these different scenes, and they're all enormous compared to most cities.
Yeah, yeah, it was, I call it the amoeba city. It has no real shape. And then, and it's just kind of like there's no center, but
Mm.
all these things are going on around it, going on, everywhere. And so, so for me to be able to do a session like that, it just opened my eyes that, oh my God, all these, because I didn't really know a lot of the guys.
Mhm.
I would meet them there, I heard of them. I've seen their names on records,
Right.
and so, for me, it was just like, oh my God, And so, the record day came out good. Gerald was very happy. And so, that was my first professional recording session.
Great start. My son's a guitar player, and he was enamored of, the Slash and all those guys. I was in LA at the time, and he said, "Dad, didn't you go to the Roxy and the Troubadour?" I said, "No, man. I went to Dante's and Carmelo's." I
Right,
said,
right, right,
"Jazz."
right.
Just to expound upon those, so many different scenes out there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the Roxy and the Billboard and, the
Viper Room,
Whiskey.
and so you
Yeah.
were always jazz focused, though, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That was, and it wasn't like it was something that I chose. It was just like that's where I was.
Hmm.
In fact, I remember kind of reflecting one time. I was doing a gig at Marla's. I used to do this Sunday gig with the big band at this
Marla's
place called
Memory Lane.
Marla's Memory Lane Supper Club. And I used to do it
Ever.
before before she bought it. It was just the Memory Lane.
Hmm.
And so I used to play at the Memory Lane with the big band all the time. And, we would, play behind people like O.C. Smith and Ernie Andrews, Lorez Alexandria. I even played behind during that time, Cab Calloway.
Wow.
It was just like, so it was like all these opportunities playing with these different people. And I had, I was still a teenager. And so,
Yeah,
so it
but
was
you were
just,
there for a reason. You might have been young blood, but you were holding your own.
yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it. I was obsessed, and here was the opportunity. That again, as an adult, reflecting back on that, just such an outlier position to be in. To actually get paid to learn and play with all these professional people at such a young age. And my parents, before I got my driver's license, they took me everywhere. My mom and dad drove me to every gig, and my dad would sit there and listen to all my every gig that I did because
That's
they'd
wonderful.
have to get me there.
That's
So
wonderful.
Hey, everybody out there in cyber world, this is Adam Nussbaum.
Hi, Dave DeCenzo here.
Hi, Bermuda Schwartz here.
Hey everyone, Stanton Moore here.
Hey guys, Johnson Pesta here.
Hey everybody, this is John J.R. Robinson.
Hi, Todd Zuckerman here for the Drum Center of Portsmouth. They're knowledgeable, they'll be able to help you and guide you and make the right choices for you and the music that you play.
From Wingnut to Wuhan, these chaps know what they're talking about. Highly recommended. But what do I know? I'm a drummer.
Hello everyone, my name is David Victor. I'm General Manager with the Craviato Drum Company. We wanted to offer a one-ply, solid shell product, but we wanted it to stay true to our mission of offering handmade drums of uncompromised quality built here in the USA. So take a listen to our Center Stage Series drum set.
yeah.
So at some point you began, let's call it a little bit of a fascination with the brushes.
Yeah, that started actually in college.
Tell me about that.
I tell this story because it's so vivid in my mind, where I was doing a rehearsal, and I was probably a sophomore, I think, in college, and
And this was at Cal Arts?
this is Cal State Northridge.
Oh, that's right. Cal State.
Yeah, Cal State Northridge. And so, so I was, and by the way, at Northridge, I wasn't in the jazz. I didn't play in any of the jazz bands. I studied the classical percussion there. I didn't take drum set or Latin percussion or anything like that. Everything was classical. I studied with a lady by the name of Karen Irvin, And so anyway, with that said, I had a rehearsal with two musicians I knew from the school. One was his name was Carl Jones, a saxophone player. I don't know if he's still playing or whatever, and and I believe Vanessa Brown was the pianist. And we were just having a little rehearsal at an apartment, I believe, and we were playing a ballad. Carl called a ballad, so I pulled out the brushes and I started playing it. And in my mind, I remember thinking, I just didn't really know that much about brushes. I knew how to kind of keep time, and I just say, I'll just stay out of the way, kind of thing. And so when we were done with the ballad, Carl turns around and says, he's a saxophone player, mind you. He's not a drummer, anything like that. He says, in a very serious voice, you should take brushes more seriously. And I was just like, it just like sent shockwaves through my body, like, oh my, it's just like somebody just punched you. It's like, wake up, man. And so from that point on, every record I listened to, I tried to decipher. Anybody like, fortunately I was, around people like Billy Higgins and Lawrence Marable, where I could see them, and I would go, okay, yeah, you do that, you do this, that sort of thing. And so, so I kind of developed some understanding. I think I only had like one formal brush lesson when I asked one of my teachers, hey, can, what do you do with these things? And they showed me how to, the days that, kind of a sweeping pattern. And I felt a little insulted because I asked him, I said, well, is that it? And he goes, yeah, that's it. And I my it was kind of like the what's that dog that's listening to the the stereo, kind of leaning in his head.
Right.
What? No, that can't be it. What is that? And so anyway, so with that said, I really took a great deal of my time really trying to find out what it was about them. And so then I ended up graduating, and I had a gig in Las Vegas with this fantastic pianist and vocalist by the name of Kirk Stewart. And he's on record with Sarah Vaughan at a record called Live at the Tivoli Gardens. And he sings a duet with her. He sounded like Nat Cole, which is unfortunate because it wasn't something he tried to do. It was just, that was the way it was. And so, and he also could play, and he played piano like he was like an Oscar Peterson style pianist. I mean, this guy could play. I mean, I was so lucky, and so I learned a lot from him. And the situation was, we were playing at the Desert Inn Hotel. And the Desert Inn, some people may know it because of Bugsy Siegel. It may ring a bell. It no longer exists because they've been torn down now, and the Wynn Hotel is there now. And so anyway, they had a nice lounge, and they had 3 or 4 different bands playing throughout the night. And so I got a gig out of college, 6 nights a week playing there. And we had 3 45-minute sets. And so, so the bands were kind of juggled around. The only problem was that it was made for a real long evening because you only play for 45 minutes and you might have a 2-hour break, and then you got to come back, play for another 45, and then, and a big break. And then, next thing you know, it's 3 a.m, right. And so that was 6 nights a week, but I loved it. I was straight out of college. I had my own place, I was making a little money. And the big deal was I could go see other acts that were in town because Kirk knew everybody. So anyway, with that said, we would play in the lounge, and so it was a nice jazz trio. The problem that was presented to me is that the lounge was really intended only for people who lost their money and they were given like drink tickets, and they can go and sit in the lounge and listen to some music. The music should not go beyond that little area because they didn't want to distract from the tables. You didn't want someone gambling, playing blackjack, and go, "Oh, that music sounds good. Let's go check it out. I'm out." That sort of. No, right. They want to keep people at the tables. So if it was too loud or was carrying too far, a red light would come on. Right?
Really?
Yeah. The bartender basically would probably be told by the manager, and the manager would hit the button and it would flash. And so only we could see it. Only we could see it.
Right.
The audience didn't see it. It was like above this thing, and we were like, oh. So I would play, when I first started the gig, I would play sticks, and it was just always too friggin' loud, always too loud. Mm-hmm. So about a month in, I stopped playing with sticks. I played 8 months straight with only brushes.
There you go.
And so because of Kirk, he was very, I mean, the guy was so experienced, and he would, definitely was like old school. They tell you when you were playing too much, and all of that. And so I really developed, a way of playing with the trio, and so because of him and because of the circumstances, I had to play with brushes. And I do remember my drum teacher, one of my drum teachers named Raymond Pounds. Raymond Pounds was in town in Vegas, and he came by and he listened, and he came over and he snatched the brushes out of my hand. He said, "Come here, man." And so he said, "You got to dig in." I guess I wasn't digging in enough. And so, and then later it was funny. Later he would kind of like say, "Well, I was just trying to show you something," but he had told me something that I didn't believe. And
what was that?
And he said, you never do double strokes with brushes.
Hmm.
And so, for whatever reason, I mean, we talked about it later, it's not a big deal, but for whatever reason, that was his, his thought process. And for me, it was another sound,
Sure. Yeah.
I get what he was saying, but for me, I never believed it. And so I continued to, do that. And in fact, one of the rudiments that's in my book is based on a double stroke roll.
Yeah, I want to talk about that in a minute.
So anyway, but that's kind of how that happened and developed. And so then, after that, I would go on to work with Sammy Davis Jr. and Frank Sinatra and all of that. And,
well, we'll get to that. Some of the young drummers, I think, they're just trying to play as loud as they can. I don't think they're asked as often to play soft.
Yeah, I mean, it's the style of music that they're playing. Because I often think about let's talk about like someone like Tony Williams. Tony Williams was in a circumstance where he was given an incredible amount of freedom by Miles Davis when he's 16, 17 years of age. And in fact, in an interview, he said, maybe I had too much freedom, And so I'm not talking about him playing loud, but I'm talking about, the energy and the polyrhythms and stuff that he was bringing to the music would not be allowed in another circumstance.
Right.
And so he was allowed to flourish in that kind of way, and I think that, what happens a lot now for young musicians, they're all playing with their peers. So they're doing whatever they do. There's not like some older guy saying, "Hey, well, that's cool, but bring it down." And, no, it's just like, this.
You're right. They're not asked to. I came up in playing a lot of trios, and you'd have to play where somebody was having dinner like 6 feet in front of your bass drum, right? And I thought I knew brushes, and I went to study with Jeff Hamilton. And a day later, I was like, "All right, back to the drawing board,"
Yeah.
But you need somebody to kick your butt and show you what's possible.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's that's mentorship. That's kind of like on the job training. You can't know everything. In fact, I say that college for me was more of like gathering information, and then later on I would decipher it. Because it's just impossible to take everything in. You're doing everything quarter to quarter or semester to semester, and then you're trying to pass to.
So did you ever work out of the Philly Joe book, the brush book?
I didn't get that book until after, right before I was filming the Living Art of Brushes. In fact, I pay a tribute to him. I use one of the strokes, and it's called Philly Sweeping It. Mm-hmm. And so that's, in homage to him, I put that in there. And so I have a copy. I'm trying to remember who gave it to me, but I was given a gift of the book. The original book, which was really nice. And so I've looked at it, and one of the things I wanted to do, and I talked to his son briefly, and it just never worked out. But I would really, I really think that the codification that I did in Brushworks, my book Brushworks, really does do justice for the sounds of the brushes and how you create sound. And I find that every brush book that I look at, and it's no disrespect to the author, but, when you write a quarter note, and then you put a circle under it, saying sweep, circle, well, it doesn't sound like a quarter note. It's like 3 direction changes. So I'm hearing za ga ga za ga ga. I'm not hearing a quarter note, Mm-hmm. So the codifications that are out there don't really represent the sound, And so in Living Art of Brushes, each note head equals a direction change or a sound change. And so that way you can, like I'll do a lot of gigs, especially like, you just have one rehearsal and then, I'll just write out, the brush pattern that I played on that particular thing, because it can be all different kinds of things. And so I would really love to take the Philly book and codify it in the language that I used in Brushworks, because I think it's a fantastic book. Same thing with Ed Thigpen, honestly, his book as well.
Well, your book is wonderful. I love the way you invented a set of rudiments that are sort of onomatopoeic, right? I mean, it sounds like what it is.
Yeah.
And I was looking through some of them, the sweepalit, fleximacue, paraslittle. One of my favorites, paraslittle diddle. And once you learn what you're calling a slittle or a sweep or a flex, they all make such great sense, because that's exactly what it is. It's how it sounds.
Yeah.
It's
That's
a
exactly
brilliantly
right.
laid out book, man. That's been a great book, great addition to the pedagogy.
Yeah, no, thank you. And and it's so, once you get a hold of it, like I've had guys, I mean, and I only started naming the things because people were asking me what I was doing,
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, you remember Colin Bailey?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, so Colin, he was one of the first people. I remember I was playing with, I think I was playing with Joe Williams and doing a festival or something, and he was up playing with someone as well. And he was going by my dressing room, and I was in there, and I was doing some paraslittles. At the time, it didn't have a name, I was just, and so what I had done was I was so enamored with Sammy Davis Jr. and the dancers.
That's what I want to get to.
That those rudiments are basically me attempting to like give myself some sort of facility to emulate what I was hearing with them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where that started.
That's a natural jump. You were fascinated with the brushes. You knew the history of drumming, and then it ties so well into tap dancing. And soft shoe. And you ended up working with Sammy Davis Jr., who was one of the great masters of all time as a hoofer, in addition to all of his other skills. And I've seen you do some videos where you make some parallels between their steps and your sound.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Is that something you talked about with Sammy, or did you put that together on your own? Or
no, it was all observation, and it happened.
Little drums too, right?
What's that?
He played little drums too.
Let me tell you something. There's some videos, and I witnessed it live, but there are some black and white videos of Sammy going on TV and just playing drums. And if you didn't know he was Sammy Davis Jr., you just say, man, this guy is swinging, because he could swing. And see, that's,
Go ahead.
Go ahead. It's just one of the most beautiful things about like Sammy is that it seemed like so natural, all the things that he did. But I mean, he grew up doing it. He was around it. So he's a complete outlier, taking all these things in as a kid, and plus the talent, and all of that. But let me tell you something. The idea of communicating with the dance and singing and all of that, it's one thing to play drum solo and, you're doing, that is one thing. But when you can go, stop, boom, boom. But you know, and that's how he would dance, And I was like, man, these guys are always in time. It was just like, wow. So, so I had an epiphany over a 2-week gig where Sammy Davis Jr. had just wrapped a movie that Gregory Hines produced called Tap. And it's the story, the plot is, kind of thin, but it's okay. But it's the dancing in the movie that you got to see, because you have all these hoofers. And man, I'm so glad Gregory did the movie, because, a lot of those guys are gone and, whatever. But anyway, so after they wrapped that movie, Sammy had a 2-week engagement at Bally's Hotel in Las Vegas with Jerry Lewis. And in the beginning of the show, they did this. We would do the overture, and then they came out and they would do this bit, and and they would trade fours tap dancing. So Sammy would dance, and Jerry would do the Nutty Professor kind of tap, and he could actually tap dance too. He wasn't swinging like Sammy, but he could tap dance, and so he would do the Nutty Professor kind of thing. And so Sammy, part of the bit was he would incredulously say, Jerry, what are you doing? He said, what? I'm tap dancing. He goes, that's not tap dancing. I'll show you tap dancing. And so Sammy would gesture to stage right, and out would come Bunny Briggs, Sandman Sims, and Arthur Duncan. The following week, Gregory Hines would sneak in. He would be the last person to come in, totally surprise Sammy. But every night I watched these guys all had, they were stylistically different, but it was all swinging, So I talk about that in my TED Talk, one of my TED Talks called, I think Rhythm in America or something like that. But anyway, it was Clayton Cameron TEDx Manhattan Beach. And so, I talk about, the influence of Sammy Davis Jr. And so, I could hear the double paradiddles and all of that. I'm assigning my own language that I know to what they were doing. Meanwhile, they call them combinations, they're combinations. And so you could hear that stuff and you go, oh man, that's so swinging, and when I reflect back on it, it was like a lot of groups of threes, and then, even some polyrhythms on top, like a little 4 against 3, or always like a 2 and 3 sort of thing like that. And so it was always in the pocket, no matter what they were doing, and they were dancing. So that meant that they had to shift their weight all the time, to one foot or the other, to get these different combinations and stuff. And so in itself was like elegant,
Oh yeah.
And so I was so enamored with those guys. I would hang out. I would immediately go back, even from the first night on for the 2-week period. I go back to my room with my brushes and go, let me see, Sandman, man, he did something, man. It was like, sweep that, because Sandman would do the in the old days, he didn't do it then, but they would put sugar or salt on the floor to get that little grit. And the little, just so they can slip and slide.
Like a brush.
And so I could relate to that. And so I was like, oh my God, the rhythms, he's sweeping and, all of this stuff. And then, there was Bunny Briggs who had this rapid fire tap, he could really move, it was like, like a crazy double bass drum guy or something, he could do all of that, with 1 foot and all that. And so all of these things were in time, though. It wasn't just like, some long, no, it'd be, you just see him and I was just like, oh my God, that shit is so bad. So I would go back to the room, and so the problem is there was no technique yet that I had developed to get everything. So that's where all the brush rudiments came in, where I started going, okay, what do I know how to do? Well, I know how to do rudiments. So then I started substituting, especially with the diddles. Diddles I found were real easy to substitute for sounds. Mm-hmm. So like the paradiddle, just, anything with a paradiddle, just, going and let me see if we can see. Yeah, got that. So, so like you say, the parasolo was, slittle was just back and forth. So I could do that, and then paradiddle diddle, substitute one of them and then play a diddle. That sort of thing. Yeah. And so all of these little different techniques that I developed, I started just plugging in sounds. So the tap sweep, where you just and the tap sweep is really a tribute to Billy Higgins, because Billy, I was showing him the paraslittle one day at a photo shoot for Remo, and he says, well, Clayton, what do you do for perpetual motion? And I asked him, I said, well, Billy, what do you mean perpetual motion? I heard old school guys talk about that before, and then he goes like this, he goes like this. And so for him, for the old school guys, they used to do, when they would do a double stroke roll, they might get that motion like this, where they would go that sort of thing, right? And so I was like, oh man, that's so cool. That's how the tap sweep was developed. Tap sweep is when you tap, sweep, tap, sweep. So it's like a diddle. It's another diddle, right? And so I took that motion that Billy had and just so that's based on what he was talking about. So so all of those things, based on what the dancers were doing, was just such an integral part of my thought process. It just really took me in a whole nother direction, going, ooh, I love that. And so just
That's
trying to
brilliant. That's brilliant, Clayton. You made the connection between the dancing and the playing, and you understood that it wasn't the machine gun stuff that really made it happen. It's the musicality and the nuance, and adapted that into the brushes. Oh man, nobody had ever done that before. That's wonderful that you put that together.
Yeah, it was, it's just total out of my own love for what I was hearing. I mean, I just love those guys, and just wanting to, kind of get a piece of it, if you will, emulate it. And so that's really all it was.
I saw Sammy doing a trading fours with another dancer years
Yeah.
ago, and he smoked him on nuance. He wasn't going to try to out
Yeah.
do you that
Blurry,
way.
yeah.
It would be like set that, ooh, take it, get that.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
he
his whole
did.
body's involved, and it was just elegant and perfect, and you
Yeah,
couldn't
that
agree
might have
with more.
been like his last time on stage, the thing you're talking about with Gregory Hines.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and I was there.
Were you?
Yeah, I was there, and
You caught that same thing. He smoked him on musicality, on artistic expression, on nuance. And he wasn't
Yeah.
trying to smoke him. I don't mean like it was a
Yeah.
competition.
But it was even Gregory just bowed down and just said, I got nothing to say after that.
That's the
And
mastery
and so
there.
that was brilliant. That was like, I was sitting and thinking, I was like, yeah, that's probably Mr. D's last time on stage.
Mhm.
And and he was sitting there throughout the whole thing. He was suffering from cancer. He had not lung cancer, carcinoma of the throat.
Mm.
And so he was sitting there, and that was like his first time out of the hospital in a while. And he was living at home. He was now living at his home, and so that 60th, that was the tribute of 60 years in show business, and everybody was friggin' there. The Michael Jackson, the heavyweight champion of the world, Mike Tyson, because I went to the house afterwards, and Mike Tyson was there, Whitney Houston, an unmarried Whitney Houston, and I remember Mike Tyson kept hitting on her. Clint Eastwood. I mean, it was just like Sammy's house was filled with love. All these different celebrities, Michael Jackson, hanging out, talking to Michael as much as you can, and but he actually talked, and so it was just one of those things where he had such influence on people, with the way that he carried himself, the history of the show business that he was a part of and really responsible for a lot of it, and so I was just like so fortunate. So for me to be able to see him every night and then have that epiphany that I really need to focus on what he's doing, it just changed my life, really.
I saw him once live with the Basie Band, and it was one of the best experiences of my life.
That was the
Hands
first.
down.
Yeah, that was the first Las Vegas show that I would see on my break. Was Basie with Sammy Davis Jr. I have to say I was a little disappointed because I was hoping to see Harold Jones playing drums.
Oh, I see.
But
And
it was still a good night.
Was it
And,
Duffy?
Was that?
Was it Duffy? Who was playing?
No, it
drums?
was I think it was Greg Fields.
Oh yeah, okay.
Greg Field. But I'm a big, as we all are, right? Papa Joe Jones. My three are Papa Joe Jones, Sonny Payne, and Harold Jones.
Can't get over that.
I'm just like, so. But that was one of the greatest shows I ever seen. It left an indelible impression on me, and I remember saying,
Same here.
"Man, I would love to play with Sammy Davis Jr. one day."
Mm-hmm. That's great, and you did. Now the other giant name. You've worked with a lot of great people, but we have to talk about Tony Bennett. Now, how was that gig different from Sammy Davis?
Well, see, to me, Sammy Davis was like, to me, getting a master's in showbiz. I learned so much.
And
He
when,
was.
excuse me for interrupting, when you talk show business, you're talking a different set of everything from like jazz drumming and jazz players.
Yeah, I mean, just
That's
just
a
the way
different
he
world.
knew how to put a show together, just the way he could change in the middle of the screen. I remember one time, and I'll get back to the Tony Bennett, but I remember one time we were playing a show at Cobo Hall in Detroit, and the power went out, and so we always played with an orchestra. We had strings on one side and horns on the other, rhythm section in the middle, and so the power went out. We're all on stage, and so all that were the only reason we could still see was there were floodlights in the hall, and it kind of kept things at least illuminated enough where you can see. So Sammy tells his stage manager, go get my shoes, which is tap shoes, and put them under the piano. So it's still kind of dark. He goes out, he puts them on. Sammy comes out, stands under one of the floodlights, and sings a cappella, Old Man River. You could hear a pin drop because people realize, the power went out, but hey, wait, Sammy's up there. And so he sings that, and just like, he had this powerful voice, but, again, it was like the drama of it all. And so he finished the song, and still there was no power. And so he put on his tap shoes, and he tapped. After he finished that, there's still no power. So he came up and played the drum solo on my drums. By the time the power came on, Sammy had done friggin' a unbelievable show already without the band. Without the band, with nobody but him.
Yeah.
So I was just like, oh my God, that was incredible. I was like, man, it's just like, it doesn't matter if you are confident in what you do. It doesn't matter that all these other things are going on. You can still deliver, you can still, and that left an impression on me that, I try to carry myself that way. Something goes wrong in a bandstand, make it, make some lemonade, make it something else. And that's what Sammy did. It became a completely different show on a whole nother level.
On the spot.
On the spot. And everybody knew it. Everybody knew it. Everybody probably walked away with, oh my God, that was the most incredible show I've ever seen, because it was like spontaneous, and it was like what he did,
Mm-hmm.
So with that said, going into Tony Bennett, I had learned so much. I had all these skills in order to deliver for someone who was not necessarily a teacher, just a great artist. And so I was able to come to the table with a lot of shit. I remember we did, I think we did maybe 4 gigs before we were in the studio recording a new record, right? And it was Steppin' Out. My first record I did with him was called Steppin' Out. And that ended up winning a couple of Grammys and putting him on MTV and all of that kind of stuff. But, when I was in the studio, we did Steppin' Out. And so Tony wanted a drum break in the middle, a drum break, just a little drum break. There was, and so I took out a newspaper and I put it on a floor tom on the other side of my hi-hat, and I played the drum break on that newspaper with my brushes. A review came out of the record and said, man, Tony not only can sing, but man, he can dance. The guy thought that Tony was tap dancing because of the solo I played on the little 2-bar break or whatever it was.
Tony was never known as a dancer.
Right. And so, but that was the effect.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have done that had I not, heard about Papa Joe and then seen Sammy and, and had all that experience. You know what I mean? It wouldn't have even crossed my mind.
Showbiz.
Yeah. So that was like the showbiz part of that,
Right. That's a good answer. That's what I was going for. Now, also, you put in a world where you're hanging out with celebrities. That's kind of cool, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was, because of, I was just real fortunate. I mean, all these guys, the main thing is that they were great artists, and that's what I always admired. Not so much the celebrity part of it, but they were celebrities for a reason. I mean, they were so friggin' good, right?
That's what I meant.
And
Yeah.
so, you know, but because you're working with them and you're there and all of that kind of stuff, it's like I was always kind of like, I had the mindset of just being professional. I never asked for autographs or anything like that from any of the artists that I ever work with initially. And later on, you're comfortable and I wish I had an autograph picture from Sammy. Tony Bennett, did this painting. That's on
That's
the
the cover
cover.
of your book. I know he
Yeah.
painted it.
Yeah.
That's great.
And so so things happen, whatever. So yeah, so you're with the people who have reached a high level, and so I always considered, you know, you know, myself just a learner. I always wanted to learn. I always wanted to get better and better and better. And so that gives you, confidence when you can deliver intensely and even in a real subtle way. Being intense in a subtle way, to me, is art. It's like a drop shot in tennis from Roger Federer. It's just like, oh my God, that's just like. And so because of Sammy, because of all of my experience with that and other things too. I work with Joe Williams, and I learned a lot from him too before going with Sammy. So you're learning from all these guys, and so the moment I arrive in Tony Bennett's thing, the reason why I felt that I fit so well is because going all the way back to the big band with those mentors, going through Sammy Davis Jr., being with Joe Williams, and so I remember being in the studio on one record, and Tony we were never in booths. We were always on the floor together, and maybe a little baffling, but we were always played in one room. And so I remember one time Tony saying, "Hey, Clayton, the brushes are too loud." And I said, "Okay, Tony, no problem, And so I said, "Man, the brushes are too loud." So what do we do, So in that moment, when you're playing brushes, one of the things, because the brushes travel across the head of the drum, that's one sound, So if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm covering the entire head of the drum, you can hear that. But if I play that same rhythm and go,
Mm-hmm.
I'm still playing. I'll call these quarter notes: 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it suddenly becomes really soft, right? So instead of playing, I think we were doing. I can't remember the tune. I wish I could, but I'm thinking that it was "Sentimental Journey." Gonna take a sentimental journey. Da ba dee da da da. So I might have been playing something like that. So when he said the brushes are too loud, I end up going.
That made him smile.
And I say to everybody, I said, do that for 3 minutes. Do that for 3 minutes and swing and stay. And Tony came up to me afterwards. He goes, "Oh, Clayton, that was perfect. I wanted to whisper the lyric."
Mm.
You see? So here you have this great artist, he just said, "Hey man, the brushes are too loud." Now if you don't have enough to kind of deal with that, there might be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So so that's why I say I was prepared by all these guys before I got to Tony. I wouldn't have been able to work with Tony prior to working with Sammy Davis Jr. I wouldn't have had, I don't think, I just wouldn't have had the experience needed for an artist like him.
Well, people get lucky breaks, but you earn your career. You know what I mean? It's great that you grew up with the right settings, but you held your own when you were given those opportunities, and that's why you stayed there so long.
Yeah, well, there's a tremendous amount of respect for what I do. I mean, I really put a lot of care into what I do, and don't take it for granted. And realize that these opportunities, don't come along all the time, and so try to make the most of them. And I've always tried to do that.
Clayton Cameron has been my guest. It's been wonderful spending time with you, Clayton, and so much great, valuable information from you. I really appreciate it. You can be found on what social media platforms?
Yeah, Facebook, Instagram, all that stuff.
And you continue to teach where?
I'm still teaching at UCLA, and I teach privately. If anyone's interested, they can email me at cbrushman@gmail.com. And that's it.
Beautiful, man. I really appreciate it. Let's hang next time we're in the same city. I owe you a lunch or a beer or a coffee or a dinner or something.
All right, I'll take you up on that.
All right, brother. Take care.
Memphis Drum Shop is the world's premier provider of percussion instruments. With 6 showrooms of gear, mycymbal.com, the Memphis Gong Chamber, and a first-rate repair department, turn to Memphis Drum Shop for all your percussion needs.